Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back to the show. We are joined by our professional of the year, our doctor, our friend, our amazing Grant Venerable, our chemist, our artist, and of course, our author of the memoirs. Grant Venerable, how are you doing today, darling?
I'm fine.
Great.
I'm sitting here trying to gather my thoughts to see how to start this broadcast. What I come up with is, what should I call it? I'm calling myself this morning a, uh, I just wrote it down here.
What?
Um, well, I'm a liberal and a conservative.
Okay.
I'm a liberal and a conservative in a very durable way. In other words, those terms for me do not change,
Mm-hmm.
although I may change.
Yeah.
And when those terms get stuck in our political conversations, they tend to lose their meaning.
Yeah.
And I realize I'm a natural law conservative consistently because I have realized more and more as I'm around longer and longer on this planetary sphere that
Ah.
the answers to all of our problems already pre-solved. They've been solved. In fact, they started getting solved with the evolution of the Earth and the solar system. And that's been 4.5 billion years ago. And I realized somewhere around 1980 that if we really want to solve our problems, let's look at the source of the ultimate solver of problems, which is the universe. And by that I mean the universe is founded upon natural laws that created the universe. So there's really no imperfections as far as the universe is concerned, because it just keeps rolling along. And when it created people, however that happened, people originally began to look at the skies and at their environments to see what their sources of good were, like food, what to eat, how to get food, how to protect yourself from weather, from famine, from other people. And people that tended to pay attention to those things discovered their impressions of what the laws of the universe, the laws of natures were about. And I thought about my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, who everyone, all of his children and grandchildren called him Papa Scott. And his name was James H. Scott, Jim Scott. Well, he was a farmer from Kansas who was born in 1870. Now, that's a little while ago. But I think I really got more aware of Papa Scott's ability to perform healing when my brother and sister and I were taken on vacation, not too far from where I live now. It's about 80 miles from where I live now. And we went up to the desert, the Mojave Desert, around Victorville, in a little part of it called Apple Valley, where we had relatives. And we would go visit them every now and then. This is way back 50s. So that tells you something right there. It seems I may have talked about this experience once. And we went to the relatives who had 100-acre farm. Well, the farm didn't take up the whole acreage, but they had little crops of fruit and vegetables near the house. They had a well. They had an outhouse, and they had a minimum supply of electricity, but it was living in a very fundamental way. And it was a big part of my growing up was to how to do without. I don't think they had that much electricity, but they had about 3 hound dogs, and they had 2 great big hogs, and they had many chickens and goats, and they got milk from the goats. They didn't have dairy cattle like Grandpa Scott had out in Kansas, because Papa Scott owned about 200 head of Jersey cattle, and he got blue ribbons on a regular basis at the county fair where he lived around Topeka, Kansas, in the country. So he was a self uh, learned jack of all trades. He knew things. He had to take care of his cattle and his animals, so he became a veterinarian. How did he do that? He's what we call uh, a self-taught veterinarian. So that meant when the cattle needed surgery, he would do it. He learned how to do that. He learned the right natural plant-based chemicals to use on uh, his livestock. But he also used it for people, for his friends, whenever they were suffering from whatever malady they were suffering from. And he used various herbs and solvents, natural solvents, where these things, the herbs could be dissolved. And it was a remarkable healing agency. Well, I think a lot of where he got his knowledge was from Native American traditions, which he was close to. He kept trying to prove his ancestry to Native Americans, but he was unsuccessful with that. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs wasn't that sympathetic, but he nonetheless mastered this knowledge. Well, a couple of days after we were there, our relatives, the Hudsons, told us that they were going to have to put down one of the hounds. His name was Ike. Ike was suffering from something, and no veterinarian could do anything about it. So my dad had to go down to Los Angeles, 100 miles away, to do some business and then come back. And he said, I'm going to go confer with Papa Scott and see what he recommends for Ike. And so don't do anything until I get back. So he was gone for a couple of days and came back. He had a visit with Grandpa Scott and described Ike's condition, and Grandpa gave him a prescription, and he gave him a little bottle of Paws dope. That's what he called his cure-all herbal substance. And he would gin it up for the particular patient that he had to treat. And he says, rub this substance around Ike's jaws, around above his teeth, in his mouth, and then we'll see what happens. But I think 2 things were taking place. I think this physical treatment was taking place, which involved material substances. But I think something we call mental, spiritual processes were also invoked, because what he did in talking to my father was what we might say spiritually connected to Ike, from Grandpa to Ike. So Grandpa could communicate to Ike his own healing advice to the hound dog. So Dad got back up there and he applied the Paws dope to Ike's mouth, his gums, and then just left it at that. Well, in 3 days, 3 days is an important number in the scriptures. Things seem to happen in 3 days. if they're really important. So by Friday, Ike was bounding around again with the other dogs. And the family was so happy and grateful with that. But what it did to me was impressed me and said, oh, what is this? This property, this ability that my grandfather has. And I began to develop my own ideas about healing and how to focus on that in my own being. Well, one word I don't want to forget to mention is diabetes. And diabetes is one of the most, uh, what we call it, lethal diseases now in our society. There's two main types. There's the diabetes that one is born with, type A, and then the type B is one that people pick up during their lifetimes. Usually it's due to lifestyle. How do they live? How do they think? How do they relate to everything else? How do they relate to people? How do they relate to nature, the natural environment? And now diabetes, the second type, is off the chain. But I learned years ago, also in the same vein, in education, to view everything important going on around us, particularly in economics. Countries have to pay attention to their economic well-being. And how do they remedy things like crises that cause inflation, deflation, uh, those things that take away our ability to survive economically? I mention that because what woke me up originally was in the late 70s, maybe it was the early 80s, when this disease called AIDS began appearing, and the medical community could not figure it out what is going on here. And only certain people, classes of people seemed to get it, namely in the homosexual communities in New York, in the Bay Area, and Florida, but nobody could really figure out what this mysterious disease was about, where it came from. Why do people get it? How do we heal it? But it led to a great effort on the part of the community to get funding, especially from Washington, D.C. Ronald Reagan was president around that time. And to his credit, he was able to do a lot of budget support for that. Now I'm sneaking up here again on where does diabetes come from? Okay. My theme today really is people need to
Okay.
look at what works and stick with what works,
Yeah.
whatever that means for them. My father's cousin in Dayton, Ohio, pointed that out to me. That made me a conservative in a universal way, not conservative politically, which changes with the winds. Whatever seems to impress people by just using the term conservative. But I was then in the late 1960s based in Chicago in graduate school at the University of Chicago. And this cousin and his wife, we call them Uncle Lloyd and Aunt Ruth. They were very prominent residents in Dayton, Ohio. So I would drive down there at least twice a year, once on their anniversary in September, and then another time around Uncle Lloyd's birthday. He was about nearly the same age as my dad was. Um, and Uncle Lloyd had a big uh, automobile business, a tire business, an appliance business. Is one of the really prominent businesses in Dayton, Ohio. So whenever I needed tires, I would wait to drive to Dayton, Ohio and get what he called the family price for new tires. But he would also have the car maintenance and and after a few years of that, he said, "You really had good luck with this big Chrysler coupe, this 1956 two-door Chrysler coupe, a New Yorker coupe." And it just really performed well on the highway, and it was comfortable. And he said, "Well, you can't get any other kind of car because this car is what's working for you." And I said, "Yeah, you're right." But what he was articulating was what I'm articulating here. Look at what works in your life and stick with it. That's the ultimate form of what we call it, optimum conservatism. And people who know how to do it, it really makes their lives work. But on the other hand, you have an optimum liberalism in which you're open to new ways of thinking and doing things. So I do both as a conservative and a liberal together. Um, so that was setting my life up on a foundation of looking at what works. Well, I began to extend that to looking at how the laws of chemistry apply to human societies. I don't mean just in a material way at the level of atoms and molecules, but look at how atoms and molecules interact with each other to see the kind of processes that they use. I think last week or a time before, we talked about buffer systems, which come right out of chemistry. And a buffer is a particular combination of compounds like carbonates, hydrogen carbonates, acids, bases, that nature designed our bodies to maintain. For example, the acidity and the alkalinity of our blood and our internal organ systems. The word that the term chemists use is called pH. The pH of the blood stays just a little above 7. It's slightly alkaline. So if you eat something that drives the acidic level of your body upward, it'll affect the blood. And the blood system, if it isn't overwhelmed, if it's a reasonable amount of change, the body will handle it with its buffering system, ability to buffer the threat of this onset acid. Well, politically, people levels became such a thorough ally of European countries against the threat of the Nazis in Germany, against the forces of the Japanese air forces and the Italian forces as well. And so they began to conduct diplomatic activities so that countries could be buffered. That is, small, weak countries were not overwhelmed by strong countries. And okay, let me get back to diabetes. What is diabetes? It is an illness, a disease in which the blood cells, the red blood cells have to be managed so that they don't take over the bloodstream. Okay, so what are we talking about? We're talking about um, when the glucose, that's the blood that we can actually, that's the sugar in the blood that has to stay at a certain balanced level in our blood. Because if we consume too much more
Mm-hmm.
artificial, like fructose,
Yeah.
high fructose sugars,
Oh.
that can do us damage.
Mm-hmm.
If we take in too much sugar,
Yeah.
we have what's called insulin.
Okay.
Is something made in the pancreas.
Mm-hmm.
And if the pancreas gets overwhelmed and it can't make enough insulin to take care of the excess glucose in the body gets sick.
Oh.
And if it's overwhelmed, it can die. We have the same problem, phenomenon occurring in our economic system. And the equivalent of insulin is cash. What do I mean by cash? I
Yeah.
mean money. Money gets in the economic system and it starts running around the system in terms of economic transactions. And if somebody is pumping too much money into the economic system, it can imbalance our economies and throw it off. And the political governmental entity that's suffering from these imbalances can actually be overthrown. It can be damaged economically. So that's where we started this morning, was to make that point that whatever people need to handle threats from politically or from the outside, in terms of relationships with other nations, um, we can look at and study the laws of nature. Now, that's not really taught yet
Yeah.
in education, but a lot of very wise professors actually do teach that, but it isn't universal in education. I did very much attempt to introduce that process in the teaching of chemistry and physics in California.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, when I became an administrator.
Mm.
But I'm trying to simply make the point that everything that we've ever needed already exists in our material universe.
Mm-hmm.
It's that simple, and that's really all I'm saying. So
Oh.
if anyone has any questions about that, Jill will give you the telephone number to call in,
That's right. Six
and
three
maybe we
one
can.
307 4010. 631 307
Now,
4031. Go ahead. Sorry.
now, I had an example of that over the weekend. Well, I'm still trying to complete my internal revenue uh, summaries because we do serve at least two gods in this
Mm-hmm.
lifetime. We serve one that we tend to use the word worship to deal with, and we serve another one called paying our taxes to the government, the local government, the state government, the federal government, and people have all kinds of attitudes about tax payments. And so we want to minimize our tax payments and preserve as much of our income as possible. And that's why we have economic advisors to go to, which I've conferred with for years.
Yeah. Well,
Now that was kind of the story of my weekend until
oh
late
my
last night,
gosh. And just,
because I've been laboring over this, trying to get my tax summary together and all of the tax deductible categories, the kinds of income categories that I have developed in order to minimize and get as much tax back that I've already paid in to the system through withholding.
yeah.
And
Well,
I was having a fit. with my laptop computer, which isn't the newest computer available anymore. So that takes me to my many commentaries about technology, electronic technology. And that's the third God that we worship in this society. And people in this secular age have taken to more trust in the electronic gods than in the other gods that you can't see. And I'm not going to argue one way or another about that because people can make their own decisions about that. But you do see on the news feeds, America is a land of people who say they believe in God. Whoever God is or whatever God is, they say they believe in God. The assumption there is that everyone knows what God you're talking about because it could be many gods. It could be the invisible ones that people go into a worship
Yeah.
organization, a facility to
Mm-hmm.
worship, or it could be buying technology
So true.
and assuming technology is perfect, and it's far from it. And that takes us to a whole nother debate, argument, conversation about the efficacy of which gods we want to worship and believe. Where is our faith? And the other F word here is fear.
Yeah.
One of the greatest gods in on the planet because it's utilized that way. With people build up enough fear about anything, it plays the role of the spiritual God. And so it begins to supplant the spiritual God, just like computers do. Well, unfortunately, the manufacturers in what we call Silicon Valley industry believe that their creations are infallible. Of course, they know they're not infallible, but that God is fallible. I will tell you that. And that gave me a fit uh, yesterday evening as I was working on my tax summaries. And I was in the middle of typing and I realized I was getting a lot of errors in the computer and it was shut off my document. I
Mm-hmm.
said, what happened? So I was trying, I must have tried for 2 hours to find where the document disappeared to. And I was having a fit. And I was being overcome by the fear God, fearing I may have lost the document. It just disappeared off the screen and I couldn't find it. I was looking for copies of the document, but they weren't up to where I had left off on the document I had been working on. And I said, that's a terrible thing for everyone that
Yeah.
works on a computer when their document just vanishes into nowhere. And then my inner voice chimed in and said, Grant, you need to just forget this for now and let the computer heal
Mm-hmm.
itself, just like Grandpa Scott taught us how to use
Yeah.
natural substances and right thinking to heal issues that we're having. So that's what I did. So I said, 11 o'clock, I'm going to bed. I'm going to let the
Aw.
computer and I'm going to just shut it down. Shut it
Oh, did I lose you, Beb?
morning and
There
turned
you
on the
go.
computer and I said, "Oh, I think this document has returned because I'm seeing things." It was on my cloud drive, what Microsoft calls OneDrive. And I said, to uh, boot it up. And there it was on the screen, right where I had left it when I was entering the last pieces of crucial data. So there I was following my own advice and found my precious document that I don't have
Yeah.
to uh, revise back to the latest document I had of that tax document. So I said, I think I will talk about that with Jill and our audience this morning. So, and
Well,
I know you use
Grant,
computers all the time, and
all the time. I know. And there's always technical issues, right? On and off, which I can't stand with technology. But how was it back in the day when you started, when you were in the medical field and all, like with, right? They weren't, you weren't using computers much at all, were you?
I was big time into computers
All
in
time
the
through a career?
1980s.
Wow. See, because I started in 96 and I barely, and that was like, I remember my college resumes weren't even typed, they were handwritten. So you really started early then.
I started earlier
Mm-hmm.
than most people, but it was because I was shut out of my academic field, out of my job in Northern California. And I said, wait a minute here. I've been teaching my students how to do
Yeah.
chemical calculations by a way that is not taught in any textbooks. And I ran across how to do that just from my associations with holistic teachers, thinkers, how to use a structure of the whole, the WHOLE, whole. And I applied the knowledge of that structure to ordinary chemical calculations, which was the bane of so many students in
Yeah.
trying to do well in chemistry. And I showed them a way to actually envision the solution, what it should look like.
Okay.
What that meant was taking a cue from Wittgenstein, who was one of the great German philosophers, who said, if you can envision what a solution is supposed to look like, you can solve anything.
Ah,
I said, wait a minute, I've already been doing that. I showed the students a way to look at
interesting.
all the information they're given and a way to put that information into a mapping, like a map of a territory
Yeah.
in which you get from the origin to the destination by following this map. And if you could create that map, which nobody was teaching in the chemistry classroom in the United States, they were teaching what's called dimensional analysis
Okay.
using the units that you need to get to an answer, like you need grams,
Mm-hmm.
you need milligrams, you need
Mm-hmm.
liters, you need moles. Of course, moles scared everybody to death,
Yeah,
but
right?
until they understood what a mole was. And a mole is just another name for a collection of an Avogadro's number of
Okay.
molecules or atoms. And that's a big number. It's uh, six with about 23 zeros after. So it's a big, humongous number. But it's key to being able to do chemical calculations very easily. So I was able to show the students how to map
Yeah.
the problem, map their data they're already given,
Okay.
map the conversions that enable you to connect the right numbers together. And what it gave you is once you had a map, you could translate it into the same equation that dimensional analysis gave you.
Yeah.
And so only half the class could get the dimensional analysis part, and the other half said, I don't see it. You're leaving something out. Well, what I left out was the visual part that Wittgenstein was referring to. And once they mastered that, it's like 90% at least of the rest of the class was able to master the calculations. So that technique that I was teaching, I reasoned I need to take on the road into Silicon Valley industry and persuade companies to hire me to show their software and hardware engineers how to do a better, more optimum job of designing and manufacturing hardware and software. Well, I was right, but it took a lot of effort to get to that point. But it did lead to an important position in Silicon Valley around 1983. I was hired by a vice president of software, and I walked in cold. I had mastered how to market myself by just doing a cold call to a company, getting in, talking to a vice president or a president, and saying, look here, I have something I think that would help this company really optimize and reduce the cost of their production of microprocessors. So, Jill, that's how I got in to the industry. But there was one factor that I'm leaving out there. It's important. When people are hiring into a company or a university, they always want to know, well, do you have experience in that kind of environment? And that's what is the politics of getting in to any job. You have to demonstrate that you know something about the environment. And so the vice president that hired me said, now, I have a piece of advice because we're going to bring you in as a senior systems programmer, and you've never had one single course in computer science in your life. So if you get in there and your colleagues find out you've been a chemistry professor, they're going to wonder, how can you possibly help them with computers? So he said, just keep your mouth shut about where you've been until they get used to you, they get to know you and find out, oh, this guy's really smart. He's helpful to us. So that's how I got in the industry. And so that's was my trajectory through most of the 1980s. It became the basis of publishing a book,
Mm-hmm.
and you recognize its title from what I've already said. It was called
Oh.
The Paradox of the Silicon Savior.
Uh-huh.
So I'm already likening the industry to
I
religion.
think all the cats are away.
And that
It should be
every
fine.
decent religion
Thank
has
you.
a concept of a savior in it, or something equivalent to a savior.
Mm-hmm.
So I titled the book Silicon Savior.
Mm-hmm.
That's what people were developing to save the economy, the industrial capacity of a
Oh,
nation. So that really started to govern my trajectory. Well, I got back into academe, but I was teaching. I didn't get a job as a chemistry professor because I'd been away from the field too long.
yeah.
And so chemistry departments just assumed, well, I must be really backward and behind. So they were not enthused to hire me. However, I did get hired by a dean at San Francisco State who was knowledgeable of science, biology, psychology, and he felt I could really add to their teaching force in ethnic studies.
Mm-hmm.
And now that's starting to be
Okay.
recognized as an important topic for everybody to learn, even though
Yeah.
there have been courses, there have been arguments about it. Oh, students don't need that. They don't need to know what your ancestries are about. We don't need that. Um, but you see, they were getting race mixed up with ethnicity
Mm-hmm.
and all that kind of stuff. So, but that's the big deal today.
Interesting.
And
Right?
now we have people who are doing back reacting, like um, writing about their ethnic background as descendants from England and France and Germany, Italy, and writing about the value of their cultural contribution from that heritage, but having people of other heritages accuse them of reverse racism. Now, that's the funny part of it is,
Yeah.
but that's why it's important. People need to understand. They should want to understand. And we have the opportunity to do that today because we travel a lot and we need to understand each other's backgrounds to understand our practices, our customs that might seem strange to
Yeah.
somebody else. So I think as this century moves along, we're going to have much more progress in that area. And a lot's going to be based on the timeline of the universe that I invented, developed
Yeah.
while I was still at San Francisco State. It was an idea that I got from one of my colleagues who had already done a timeline of civilization from 15,000 years ago to the present, how it
Mm-hmm.
started in his timeline from Africa around Victoria Falls along the Nile River, and that's 4,000 miles south of the Mediterranean Sea. But a lot of the great knowledge in science and philosophy and irrigation and building pyramids was developed way down there. And it came down the Nile Valley. People would, go on their boats, the
Yeah.
Nubian people from way down south. And the knowledge came to rest in Egypt. So Egypt began to flourish as a chief practitioner of that knowledge that enabled them to begin to control the Nile, to develop the calendar. And because the calendar just didn't show up in the stationery store, it had to be, people had to live for thousands of years and had to look at certain references,
Yeah.
such as the people before the Egyptians noticed in their scholarly practices, and they would make records. Well, it looks like every 1400 years,
Yeah.
the, the sun rose at the same time as Sirius, the dog
Yeah.
star, the brightest star in the heavens.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. It sparkles with a pure white light. We can see it well from the California deserts. But that star enabled what we call the setting of the calendar, which could
Yeah.
not be set until you had
Interesting.
enough knowledge transmission through high level education processes where one group could pass their knowledge to the next. And they had to go through enough 1400-year cycles to say, hey, wait a minute, that's a basis for a calendar.
Yeah.
And that's when we started to get what we take for granted now is, oh, in our particular calendar, January 1st and 12 months. But there's other there's the Jewish calendar, there's Hindu calendars, there's calendars in various different cultural systems, but they all lead to the same place of enable us to lead our lives successfully. So how are we doing there? I think we've covered a lot of ground here
Yeah, and unfortunately, no one's
already.
calling in right now, but we are still have the lines open. That's okay. 631-307-4010. Again, 631-307-4010. We are still good to go.
If if our listeners are anything like me, and I'm listening to a speaker who's very deep, and I say, oh, I don't really have a.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to ask some questions, but I need to think about this to see what I want to ask. So I'm sure that's occurring a lot here as well. But I'm happy to answer whatever questions you do have.
Wow.
Um, um,
Well, reach out,
oh, another
everyone,
one.
or go ahead.
I was just about to pick up my mug because it has a chocolate almond milk in it. And what I discovered way back in the 70s is that chocolate contains enkephalins, which are complex organic compounds that actually stimulate various of the brain systems to be able to think more clearly, as well as to feel good. I think that means it has certain connections with the endorphins. So, uh, in the morning, I like a good cup of chocolate milk because it makes me feel good and pleasant. It's a very mild kind of a high, and it's not destructive, it's not damaging, but it helps the brain to think deeply and more rapidly.
Got it. Well, also, let me ask on, as far as the memoirs are concerned, that you have been writing, and I know we didn't really speak in detail about them this time. We have in past shows. Is there any updates to
Right.
the memoirs that you're
The,
writing and adding as we speak?
I think the podcasts because they're taking me past what I developed in the memoir and developing them further. There's there's a word conspiracy thinking, and it's the kind of thinking that it's easy for people to fall into because it seems, I say seems, but it doesn't. It
Hmm.
seems to explain a lot of puzzlements that people have. And people who run for office have discovered a way to ensnare people with very easy, oversimplistic explanations of why we have certain problems in our society and then how to fix those problems. One is our distinguished Secretary of Health and Human Services, who was on last night on 60 Minutes. I'm sure a lot of people
Oh, wow.
saw him,
I did
but
not.
he
Tell me
has
what
a lot
happened.
of these uh, he was talking to Dr. Kessler, who used to be the head of the
Okay.
Food and Drug Administration. Kessler's a very educated man, unlike
Mm-hmm.
uh, the Secretary of the Health and Human Services. He knows something, but he
Yeah.
said something about the uh, fluoride, fluoride in the water. That's been
Oh,
a controversy because of conspiracy thinking,
yeah.
where it's assumed it causes damage to the mouth. But anybody that's ever taken freshman chemistry in college or even high school chemistry, if you've got a
Mm-hmm.
good teacher, they explain why fluoride actually reduces the propensity for decay, tooth
Mm-hmm.
decay. But it's a very common, well known organic chemical reaction in which the fluoride that you might use to brush your teeth with or drink in the drinking water is an ion with a negative
Mm-hmm.
one charge, and it actually kicks
Oh, wow.
oxygen hydrogen groups that are already hooked onto the enamel of the
Okay.
teeth. And those are acid groups. The OH group is an acid in organic chemistry, but the fluoride is it's a more powerful, what we call nucleophile, and it
Mm-hmm.
just kicks that OH right off the tooth.
Oh,
So it
wow.
doesn't have a chance to cause the destruction of the tooth. And I just proved its own efficacy myself because I couldn't get dental treatment for a cavity I knew I had because my dentist
Wow.
well over a year ago said this has to be taken care of right away
Mm-hmm.
so you don't lose the tooth. So when I finally got to a dentist just a few months ago, he said, "Oh, you have a bad cavity right here. I'm going to get right to work on it because maybe we can save the tooth." But the way I helped to save it myself was to take a lot of this fluoride
Yeah.
toothpaste. which has a very high percentage of fluoride in it. You can't rely on a store-bought
Yeah,
grocery toothpaste because it's
doesn't.
too small a concentration.
Got it.
But this one is 1.1% fluoride. And I
Mm,
know that is what slowed down the decay until I could reach this dentist. And then he could use my health insurance, which is based right here in California, which saved me a few $1,000s
got it.
by being here. So
Oh,
maybe that's the most persuasive thing I could say about
yeah. Funny,
looking at
my
the
son
universe,
has
which has been
no. My
around.
son has a fluoride treatment in 2 weeks. They're like 9 and 10 years old, and then my cousin's a dental assistant. She says, "You don't want to get the fluoride treatment." I'm like, "But like his teeth seem like they're decaying already, and they're concerned. They think fluoride's going to help." But everyone has such a strong opinion about that.
They do this because of this conspiracy thinking,
Yeah.
which will go in my next book.
Mm-hmm.
It's at the last chapter of the memoir in the appendix to just introduce the subject to start to help people realize some of what we've been sold is what we call a bill of goods, and it's
Yeah.
not good for us. So I'm trying to break it down. Break it down, Grant. Break it down so people can get it in simple pieces and be able to
Yeah.
absorb it and use it.
I'm a proponent for it. Every time I go to the dentist, they ask if optional to pay the extra $30, and I said, "Yes, I'll take the fluoride."
Yeah, take the fluoride. Um, um, I was going to say something. Um, oh, I was going to announce the name of the memoir
Yep.
is uh, Footprints in the Chaotic Unknown.
Okay.
And nobody can deny that we are in a chaotic moment in American history, world history, actually. But we're in a moment of chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And it's unknown because most people don't see how to navigate through that chaos. But one of the most important principles in physics is called Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And it's a way of using the uncertainty in our measurements of
Yep.
momentum and position of an elementary particle that leads us to our understanding of when we have that same kind of principle operating in our social, political, economic arena, where we can actually use
Yeah.
uncertainty to our advantage. But that equation really, I loved it when I learned it, and it helped me to do so well on my exams in graduate school. So now I'm starting to use the uncertainty principle in mastering some of the things that baffle our legislators, our judges, and our governors, our presidents. So we can get past that.
Yeah. That
But
is.
I think education has to be enlarged. It has to be more general than it is, and it's not. Our science professors need themselves
Yeah.
to know more about economics, political science, law. Our chemists need to know those things so that we're all talking the same language now.
Got it. Well, we still got 2 more minutes left in the show. How did you want to end off for today?
Well, I want to end off by reiterating, um, yeah, I want to end up by just saying there's only five principles in the universe that are not necessarily uh, chemical
Mm-hmm.
science or physical
Okay.
science, but they are related to economics. And there's five of them. And one of the principles has to do with, um, let's see, oh, the linkages, all of the connectors, all the connections in our society, connections like political, organizational connections, religious, social uh, connections. And
Mm-hmm.
then B is a compendium of all of the material things that serve our needs in society, and like where we live, what we eat, what we wear, our transportation, our
Yeah.
fuel. And then another uh, principle is, what are our objectives? What are our objectives in society? What economics calls them private
Mm-hmm.
sector objectives? But the objectives need the physical resources to be achieved. And that's like resources like food, fuel, housing, equipment. And then there's two more things. There's the creative energy
Mm-hmm.
in our Earth system, how we use invention and innovation to create positive change. And then one more, and it's the most important one, and that's the centerpiece of what's called the unifying structure of the whole. It's what unifies economics. It unifies the chemical atom. It unifies the molecule. It unifies the nucleus of the atom. But it's called the unifying principle, the organizing principle. It stamps the identity of the whole
Hmm.
system, of what it is. So chemical systems have chemical identities.
Okay.
Biological systems have biological uh,
Mm-hmm.
identities. Um, Human systems have psychological identities. So each one has its own way of organizing itself. So
Got it.
that's my word
Aw, I like the
for the
word.
day.
That's a lot of
Yeah,
words, and we appreciate your time always.
yeah,
Tell us
yeah.
how we can contact you, Grant. We got to move on.
Well,
Pleasure having you.
always you can always look at my website, Grant D. Venerable,
Yep,
PhD.com, all lowercase, and you'll find me there. And
we sure
also,
will.
you can reach me through my email address, ventwo at AOL.com.
Thank
And
you.
then in the subject area, put podcast question.
You got it. I love it. Podcast
Okay.
questions. Thank you, Grant. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay.
We appreciate your time here. And
Yeah.
again, check out the memoirs. More to come.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.